Right, perfect. Now, I want to go back into the practice piece in terms of integrating it or incorporating it into practice. But the first thing I want to do is I want you to touch a little bit on that next age group. So I don't know if you consider it like a 14 to 18, 13 to 18. Can you talk briefly about, your approach to that? At that point, is it a little bit more traditional based? Do you still include, the gameplay stuff? Do you pretty much have kids doing body weight stuff? There's a lot of talk about, where is it safe or when is it safe for kids to quote unquote use resistance? Those types of things. Can you talk a few minutes about kind of your approach in that age range?
Absolutely. Let me address kind of the last thing you brought up first, because it's a very common question for parents as well, is what's the appropriate age? I grew up in the health club industry, so it was like you weren't allowed in the fitness center unless you were 14 years old, and you had to go through like a course on how to use the
Right.
8 pieces of a Nautilus that we had. I mean, I'm on the older side, so I go back that far, but so we need to maybe help parents realize this as well. When we talk about weight training, we're really talking about resistance training, giving them resistance. For a younger athlete, even through, in my opinion, 15, 16 years old, a max vertical jump and a landing, when they land from that max vertical jump, that is a strength exercise. So jumping the eccentric forces, the forces it takes to slow your body down as you hit the ground due to your weight against gravity is tremendous. Tremendous. We can go in, 3 times body weight and all that kind of stuff. It's tremendous. Much more force is applied to the hips, knees, ankles, whatever, there than putting a 15-pound training bar across their back and teaching the skill of squatting with it. So when we talk about that, we need to talk about resistance training, using bands, resistance bands, medicine balls, Dynamax balls, and then teaching them with lighter loads. This is where I can talk about sets and rep schemes a little bit. Lighter loads that are sub-max with lower number of reps and more sets. See, again, I grew up where if it's a kid, high reps, 15, 20 reps with light weight. Well, what if their technique is poor to begin with? Now we're going to really groove that pattern 15 or 20 times. We need to understand as well, an external load helps give permanence to a movement pattern, whether it's good or bad. So what we want to think about is, let's do 5 or 6 repetitions with a real light weight, something they could do 20 times. Stop it, talk about what was great, and if nothing needs to be changed, well, let's do that again with the same weight. Let's get some permanence there. Let's do 4, 5, or 6 sets of 4 to 6 reps with a sub-max load. See, from the bodybuilding world or, traditional weightlifting, it's like, well, if you go 4 to 6 reps, it's going to be super heavy. Not when you're training children, not when you're trying to help them improve their movement patterns. So there's that side of it. To go into the programming side of kind of 14 plus, or your high school kids, it looks a lot more like traditional strength and conditioning, sports performance training. We have hour-long sessions here, and we pack as much in an hour as I think a lot of places do in an hour and a half, because it's like this. There's not a lot of time to kind of like hang out, and we have our rest period set. Each child has remember, I just said that they're still children. They're still children. When you get your high school seniors, juniors, okay, they're young men and women getting into adulthood, and hormonally things have maybe slowed down a little bit. But a 14-year-old kid, I was that 14-year-old kid that as a freshman in high school, I was like 5'6", 135 pounds. I was a child. Right. So we really have to be cognizant of that. So we'll still get into foam rolling a little bit more in depth. We spend a lot of time in activation, torso mobility, muscle activation. It takes 15 plus minutes to get through it all. And we view it as part of their workout. It's not a warm up. I mean, they're working. And we got into general prep, dynamic warm up stuff. And then we have a separate area of skill acquisition. This is where we'll do a lot of jumping rope, skipping rope, really, really important. I think it's a lost art form, and it does so much for our athletes in terms of just a little bit of conditioning, footwork, coordination, timing, rhythm, all that. And we give them different skills they have to try to accomplish within, jumping rope, and they have to ambulate and move while they're doing it. But this is where we can layer in bar skills, right? Again, lower, we're not looking to move up weight here. We have a PVC pipe or a 15-pound training bar or dumbbells or like kettlebells. We're teaching you a Turkish get-up. We're teaching you a push press. We're teaching you a clean. We'll do that, and this is also where we'll do a lot of our SAQ work. So our speed, agility, quickness work. Because again, they're not tired yet. They're at the point where they've been through all this torso mobility and active range of motion. Their prefrontal cortex that regulates movement is lit up like a Christmas tree. They're ready to learn skill. So let's do that. Then when we get through that, the way we run it here is we'll have like a primary lift is A1, a secondary lift is A2, and then we'll have B1, B2, and then either a C1 or some type of injury resistance. And it's a lot of the traditional and more contemporary sports performance, strength conditioning movements and exercises that we'll put in there. At this age, we're asking the kids to track on their own, and we teach them how to do this. Track how much weight they're using, track what resistance band they're using, what color, how many reps they're doing. And when we give them their program card, we're like, it's yours. We want them to take ownership over it at this point, especially our lower classmen, because they're just not used to that world. And we have to try to prepare them for that as much as possible.
Right. Perfect. And to backtrack into that, and you kind of already touched on this and answered the question, but for a coach, who again is short on time, maybe they're on the court for an hour and a half, and trying to say, again, that's great, Dave. I'd love for my athletes to get faster and be more coordinated and this and that. How do I integrate that into a practice? Can you maybe just separate it out or perhaps reiterate? Because again, I think you've touched on some of this already, but if you're a basketball coach and you have, let's say, 15 minutes that you think you might be able to spare, what do you do in the 6 to 9 year old range? What do you do in the 10 to 13 year old range? What do you do in the 14 to 18? Do you do it off court before practice? Do you do it on court and perhaps again integrate it into a conditioning type of drill?
Sure.
How would you approach that so that you have something you can kind of go to and say, okay, here's what I can do. Here's something I can actually use.
Great question. For your 6 to 9 year olds, for every age group, no matter what kind of coach you are, whether it's sports performance, basketball coach, or any other sport, when we put together our lesson plans or our practice plans, we're thinking about our priorities, right? Want to work on everything, but I just can't. I know my 7-year-olds, my group, they can't dribble. So that's one of our priorities is letting them feel really comfortable with the basketball, right? So that's got to be one of the priorities. So as far as the sports performance side of it and how we integrate that in that first 15 minutes, really try to look at the priorities of what your kids need. Now, basketball coaches might not really know, so I'll just tell you developmentally, we've already talked about it. They need movement exploration and discovery. They need coordination, some object manipulation. The object manipulation is an easy part. That could be a jump rope. That's manipulating an object. You're manipulating how fast that rope moves, how hard you jump into the ground while you're doing that. It could be a basketball with non-basketball related activities that are using the same part of the brain. So we'll play a game, for instance, here's a good one for you guys. We call it closest to the fence. You might say closest to the bleachers. So if they run from one sideline to the other sideline, they have to roll the ball toward the bleachers, the basketball, and the one that gets closest to the bleachers without touching the bleachers wins. So they're controlling strength. The same part of the brain that controls how much strength they put behind the basketball to try to get it in the hoop. Right? So you're training the same part of the brain and you're training the same mechanisms in a different way, and it's fun. The other thing I would recommend for the younger kids in the beginning is a little bit of free play